McLaren survive Max Verstappen pressure as they seal a 1-2 on the grid for the season opening Australian Grand Prix as Kimi Antonelli and Liam Lawson suffer shock Q1 exits. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding and I'm delighted to be joined as always by lead editor Ian Parks. Ian, first quali of 2025 is in the books, done and dusted, and well, McLaren almost came under quite a bit of pressure in Q3. Lando Norris saw his first lap in Q3 deleted for track limits. Oscar Piastri ran wide at the penultimate corner. Max Verstappen, despite the odds and what happened on Friday, was on provisional pole. And I was starting to think, whilst doing the live blog, this has happened before. This is deja vu. We've seen McLaren have the best car and then absolutely blow it come Q3. Not on this occasion. Lando on pole, Oscar P2.
Now we have our pecking order. At least
now we have
a good idea. Hello, everyone, and a very warm welcome in what is a very warm Melbourne evening, I can tell you, just coming up to 7:30 here in the evening. Great qualifying day. It's produced everything that I think we fully expected and then some, bearing in mind what you just mentioned about Kimi Antonelli and Liam Lawson both exiting in Q1, but just getting on to McLaren. Yes, huge pressure on Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri to deliver, bearing in mind Lando didn't have a lap time on the board for exceeding track limits at turn 4, as you mentioned, and Oscar didn't quite hook up that first lap as he should have done. But when the pressure was on, boy, did they deliver and then some. And they gave us the answer that we'd perhaps all speculated upon coming into this qualifying session. All suggested that it was going to be this way, that McLaren had the best car. We kind of suspected it coming out of preseason testing. We kind of suspected it coming out of practice. But now we definitively have our answer. And boy, did McLaren give us a great qualifying session in the end, because they would have left a lot of their fans on tenterhooks in particular going into that second Q3-1. But they delivered 4 tenths ahead of Max Verstappen and Red Bull. I know we're going to come on to him into a second, and what a great overnight delivery his team has produced, and what a great lap or great qualifying session overall Max did deliver in the end in that car. But yes, McLaren on the front row, it's theirs to lose, but we've got a lot of jeopardy coming our way because the forecast for Sunday is for rain, heavy at times. It's a case of when will it hit? How much impact is it going to have on the race? Even have on the start time potentially, which I know we're going to come to in a second as well. So yes, at the moment, McLaren in the box seat, but there is so much more to come.
And let's start off, and you mentioned of their jeopardy, and of course some of that is to do with the weather, which we will touch on in a few minutes. But of course, the big thing from 2024 was the McLaren, I say, lack of team orders, this papaya rules, that these rules of engagement. Has anything changed for 2025? Because obviously for McLaren, for Zach Brown, for Andrea Stella, the first race, and they've already got something to deal with both cars on the front row.
But in essence, Nick, this is what any team wants to deal with, because it now knows it has the best car. And now it's a question of managing things from the front and ensuring that it's 2 drivers. And they both mentioned it in the post-qualifying press conference themselves, that they are clear on what they have to do. They just have to avoid one another. Easier said than done, you may think. We've seen it many times in the past. 2 drivers going up alongside one another on the same row of the grid, ultimately coming to blows. As I said, that added jeopardy is going to be the weather. It introduces another factor. And speaking to Andrea Stella, the McLaren team principal post-qualifying, I asked him that exact question. Yes, you have these principles, as he called it. He used that word more than rules, principles, in terms of how the drivers need to behave going into situations such as this, where they're alongside one another along the grid. But how much jeopardy does the weather now introduce? And he did turn around and say that it's now for him and the team to go away to discuss internally even more, and then to draw up all the scenarios that could possibly come into play. And one of the biggest scenarios that we know is going to come into play is Max Verstappen directly behind them from 3rd place on the grid. We know how Max is in the way. We saw that mega performance in last year's Sao Paulo Grand Prix. His principles are very different, of course. He's got the 2 McLarens directly in front of him, and we know what he can do on a wet track. Andrea Stella described him as mega, quote unquote, one word only, to in essence, to underline just what kind of driver Max Verstappen is in wet conditions. He knows that he is the biggest threat to their possibility of a season opening 1-2 to follow on from this front row lockout here at Melbourne's Albert Park.
But actually touching on Max, and you mentioned there that, they see Max as the biggest threat going into qualifying. That was seemingly not the case. Everyone kind of thought it would be Ferrari and Charles Leclerc in particular who would take the fight to McLaren, when actually, Ferrari, a pretty disastrous session, but it was Max, despite another difficult Friday for Red Bull, kind of continuing what happened last season. But Max was, yes, okay, 4/10 off in the end, but the closest threat for McLaren. I don't think many people saw that coming.
No, not after Friday. Quite clearly, they had issues, and we discussed those on our update after Friday practice. But we know what Red Bull is all about. We know what they can do. And in particular, we know what Max Verstappen can do in a car that is more towards his liking. The difference today between Max Verstappen and the two McLaren drivers, as Max put it, he couldn't quite manage the temperature in his tyres. And at various stages, it was good enough. At certain stages, it didn't quite come into the window that he was looking for. So therefore, that's why we have this discrepancy. But the good thing for the good thing for Red Bull, the good thing for Max, is that at least they have now a solid platform on which they can build. Yes, they had their issues. They're slowly starting to work their way around them. They did that overnight out of practice coming into Saturday qualifying, and it's worked to a certain extent, albeit this gap to McLaren at the front. But as we all know, Red Bull, they are going to leave no stone unturned to ensure that they can give Max, in particular, the car that he requires. A bit different for Liam Lawson, of course. He's had his tremendous difficulties over the course of these 2 days of track action so far. And yes, he starts well down the grid compared to his teammate. Very hard, as I said, very hard weekend for him so far. And you've got to think it's not going to get any easier from where he's starting towards the back of the grid on Sunday, given the conditions, should they prevail. And every forecast suggests so far that we are going to be deluged at some stage.
Well, let's quickly discuss then not only Liam Lawson, who was knocked out in Q1, he'll start in 18th, but also Kimi Antonelli on his full-time competitive debut. He starts in P16. For both Kimi and Liam, that is definitely not the starts they would have wanted to their full-time F1 careers.
Yeah, in fairness to Kimi, he was looking good. And I dare to suggest that he would have been comfortably inside Q3. However, his car sustained bib damage, which therefore obviously that had a major effect on his lap times. And that's why he was unable to get out of out of Q1, even into Q2. So yes, he knows he made a bit of a mistake with that damage. Of course, ran over a curb. That's, of course, was the cause and effect. And as for poor old Liam Lawson, again, his own issues as well. And that's why he's starting so far back. It's not going to be easy for those two guys. Would have been a hell of a lot easier if it was going to be a dry race on Sunday, but that's not going to be the case. Fairness to Kimi, he actually turned around and said that he's looking forward to having a lot of fun tomorrow. So no shortage of confidence in that young guy, it has to be said. Liam looking a little bit more downbeat with regards to his demeanor in the pen. And he knows he's got an awful lot to make up and to do to try and make up places. But as we know, Nick, wet races throw up all kinds of opportunities for drivers at any given time. And for both of those guys, we cannot rule out a top 10 finish at this stage, because who knows what might happen in front of them.
I can't wait. And I think the rain on Sunday is the perfect race to mark 10 years of Racing News 365. And to celebrate our 10th birthday, we're doing a prize, a giveaway. If you'd like to win a scale model Formula One car of your favourite team or driver, all you've got to do to enter is be subscribed to the racingnews365.com channel and comment below any video. So for ease, just do this one. I want to win. It is as simple as that. Ian, Ferrari, and as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're kind of predicted to be McLaren's big threat for pole position. It couldn't have been much worse. Yes, okay, both cars got to Q3, but 7th for Leclerc, 8th for Lewis Hamilton. Hamilton was 9/10 off Norris's time, but I guess the positive for Lewis is actually, whilst the gap from him to Norris was huge, from him to Leclerc, it was only 2 tenths.
It was amazing just what happens to Ferrari, because we were all expecting, we've discussed it, not just me, pretty much every pundit up and down the paddock has said the same thing. They were fully expecting Ferrari to be McLaren's closest challengers over the course of this weekend. And throughout Friday practice, that definitely looked as it was going to be the case. Through final practice on Saturday, again, Ferrari looked reasonably strong, but coming into qualifying, the car just went away from both drivers. I'll get onto Lewis into a second, but
Yeah.
with regard to Charles, he said that in Q3 in particular, once he tried to lean on the car, tried to get more out of it, the more inconsistent it became. So he knows that there's work for Ferrari to do. With regard to Lewis, he was actually relatively upbeat. Yes, you've mentioned that time gap from himself to Lando and the McLarens at the front of the grid, but over the course of these 2 days, at the end of FP1, 6 tenths gap to Charles. End of FP2, 4 tenths gap. End of FP3, 2 tenths gap. And that's pretty much what we saw at the end of qualifying as well, this 2 tenths cushion. For Lewis, he said that basically the car he had underneath him today was so different around Melbourne's Albert Park that anything that he's had in the past. So he felt he was in a good window coming into this weekend from all the learning that he had undertaken, not just in practice, but either side as well, getting used to new procedures, new protocols, new ways of learning with his engineers, trying to understand his engineers, building a rapport with those engineers. So for him, as I say, very, very different to what he had previously experienced. And he's said he's having to heavily lean on those engineers to try and understand what to do with the car at any given time. In the old days, Lewis turned around and said that, Bono, just do this for me. Bono, just do that for me. And it got done. Now, as I say, he's having to rely more on information from his engineers as to what needs to be done with the car than him specifically providing the input himself. So a hugely different scenario. And to make things worse for Lewis, of course, as he pointed out himself, the wet weather, just again, I know we've discussed it a lot, folks, but it is going to play a huge role on Sunday. The wet weather just adds another degree of complexity to what he will be experiencing in that car on Sunday. Because again, it's all about the balance, the engineering, the mechanical side of that car, how it's going to react in the wet. And especially for Lewis, he turned around and said it's the first time he's worked with Brembo brakes. I'm not quite sure. Somebody will know, and I didn't ask the question as to what brakes are used at Mercedes. But as I say, for him, Brembos are going to react differently to what he will have previously experienced. So again, another added factor into all this learning that Lewis is undertaking at the moment. I asked him specifically how long he felt it might take him to get to grips with the car, and he said, I really don't know at this stage. So it could be 3, 4, 5, 6 races, who knows? It's all about the learning down for Lewis Hamilton, and every day he's learning something new about this Ferrari.
Just to very quickly run through the top 10 provisionally on the grid for Sunday's race, it is, of course, Lando Norris on pole with Piastri alongside him in second, Verstappen third, George Russell in fourth, Yuki Tsunoda P5, Alex Albon in P6, quite remarkable for those two, Leclerc 7th, Hamilton 8th, Pierre Gasly and Carlos Sainz in P10, Gasly 9th, my bad. Ian, we've got to very, very briefly mention, of course, Tsunoda in P5, Albon P6. I mean, of course, Sainz as well made it to Q3, but the Racing Bulls package and the Williams, because even Isaac Hadjar was P11 for Racing Bull. I mean, those two cars seem to have a really, really good package.
The demeanor between Yuki and Isaac, speaking to both of them in the pen post qualifying, couldn't be more marked. Yuki, just the broadest smile on his face. I
can imagine.
I've probably seen him in discussion in a post quali or post race pen. Hugely happy. And then Isaac missing out by, what was it, about 1/10 of a second, I think, in the end, Nick, if I remember correctly. Missing out on that place in the top 10. Downbeat, because I think he knew that he had the car beneath him to get that top 10 spot. Of course, we discussed racing balls in quite some depth on the Friday update, of course, after practice. And Helmut Marko having turned around and said, well, the power unit was turned up for their practice runs on Friday. That's why they performed so well. That's why they were ahead of the Red Bulls. Well, do you know what? At the end of the day,
Yeah,
they've proven
there.
a little bit wrong to Helmut there, because both Yuki and Isaac are in really good, strong positions. Yuki especially. Isaac now a little bit stressed. He turned around and said about going into his first wet race in Formula One. He did a bit of TPC running in the wet, but these cars will handle so much differently compared to any wet running he might have had in his Formula 2 season last year, when he finished runner-up, of course, to Gabriele Bortoleto in that championship. So yes, under pressure, feeling stressed. I think that's maybe why he had that demeanor, because he knows he's in the middle of the pack when it could have
Yeah.
been so much better for him, maybe even alongside Yuki, who knows. Instead, it's Alex Albon. And again, what a performance from Williams. We suspected as much that car had a degree of performance to it across preseason testing. Williams has been able to prove it, and good luck today.
Two more things very, very quickly. You mentioned about the pecking order. I mean, going into this weekend, one thing we did not expect was just how far off Haas are. 19th for Ocon, 20th for Behrman. I mean, let's just quickly sum up Behrman's weekend so far. FP1, he crashed. FP2, he missed due to crashing in FP1 and the damage. FP3 in Australia, obviously this morning, he span into the gravel, car was beached, couldn't take part in the rest of the session. Going into qualifying, had only completed 13 and a half laps across the 3 practice sessions. Oh, and a gearbox problem in qualifying meant he didn't even complete a lap. I mean, as far as, your first drive, your first Grand Prix as a full-time F1 driver goes, we thought yesterday was bad, but for Behrman, it's gone from bad to worse to even worse. It surely can't go even worse tomorrow, right?
I did ask him the question in the pen, Nick. Me again, I'm afraid, folks. It's surely the only way is up. And of course,
Yeah.
it's got to be. As you pointed out there, Nick, it cannot be any worse for your first Grand Prix weekend as a full-time F1 driver, of course. Bearing in mind, Ollie had 3 Grand Prix in deputising last year, 1 for Ferrari, 2 for Haas. And we know how well he performed for the most part across those 3 Grand Prix. The only way is up. He blamed himself. Of course he did. He's beaten himself up for that incident in FP3, described it as clumsiness. Just put his rear left on the grass. That spun him round, beached the car in the gravel. From there was no escape. But to compound matters, as you say, that gearbox issue as well. From both guys, both Esteban Ocon and Ollie Behrman in the pen, they both turned around and said that they were quite surprised at the performance of the car. They actually thought that they would be so much better coming out of pre-season testing than they have shown across these 2 days so far in Australia. So there has to be more from Haas. There has to be more to come from Haas than what we've seen. And there most definitely has to be so much more to come from Ollie Behrman in particular. Bear in mind, he knows these last 2 days have been an absolute nightmare.
And just very, very quickly, of course, I've got to look to Sunday. And the big question mark, how much rain are we going to get in Melbourne? And well, if the forecasts are accurate, it looks like quite a lot. And the big story, I guess, that's kind of murmuring in the background today is question marks over a potential change to the race time, depending on, well, just how bad the rain is tomorrow.
Yeah, now the weather forecast I've been looking at all week, and I have to say it has remained exceptionally consistent, even at this point tonight, as I stand here coming up now to 8 p.m, that heavy rain is going to hit around 11, 12 o'clock, late morning, noon time here in Melbourne. It's then due to carry on, slowly easing off, but due to carry on all the way through to start time and potentially the first hour of the Grand Prix. The start time here, of course, is 3 a.m. local time. Now, the FIA has been monitoring this all week. They've drawn up the contingency. They've been in discussions with the teams, with the drivers. And if that rain does persist all the way through to start time, then there is the likelihood that we could get the race pushed forward an hour, potentially to a 4 o'clock start. Got to be mindful, of course, of sunset here. As you can see behind me, it actually looks quite bright approaching 8 o'clock, but trust me, it is actually a little bit gloomy now. So they've got to be mindful of that start time, that they need to get the running in to ensure that we're not going to be hit by you know, the sunset going down and that playing a big role into what might happen towards the conclusion of any Grand Prix that we might get tomorrow. We will get a Grand Prix. I'm confident we'll get a Grand Prix. It's just a question of when will this rain hit? How long will it last? How much of an impact will it have into the race itself?
So as things stand, of course, the race is due to start at 4 a.m. UK time, 3 p.m. in Australia. But of course, if there are any changes, be sure to keep an eye on Racing News 365, because as soon as we know, we will confirm it. Ian, amazing stuff as always. So those who've been watching this post-quali F1 update, please do smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and, well, good luck. Let us know in the comments below just what you think is going to happen in the race. Ian and I will see you after the race on Sunday. See you later.
As always, take care, folks. Thanks for watching.